the Bible's book of Genesis. In chapter 6, verse 9, begins the story of Noah and the flood, in which God sends a great deluge to rid the earth of sinners and start anew. Different versions of this same story exist in nearly every ancient tradition around the world.
Going back 5,000 years, we have sacred texts that tell us there was an antediluvian civilization. There was a great flood and that there were survivors. The Mesopotamians speak of this in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Egyptians speak of this in the Edfu creation text. Plato learned from the Egyptians that there was once a civilization called Atlantis that existed 9,000 years before his time.
Plato wrote about the lost continent of Atlantis in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, around 360 BC. Historians and researchers have long debated whether this pre-flood civilization was purely mythological or actually existed. Arguments have been made suggesting remnants of Plato's destroyed civilization could be found at the South Pole.
I think what happened in Antarctica was that approximately 13,000 years ago, that flourishing civilization that originally came from space and establishing its presence in Antarctica was flash frozen. We actually have ancient evidence of this in the form of Plato's dialogues, where he talks about the last days of Atlantis. That basically is informing us that Atlantis was an extraterrestrial colony that had established itself on Earth, and that after a pole shift, Atlantis was moved under the ice where the South Pole currently is.
As more and more pieces of the puzzle start to come together, might we soon be able to solve the mystery of the Antarctic continent? And if so, just what might we discover?
Modern whistleblowers still argue that there is more about Antarctica that is being covered up than we think. There are entire bases down there, entire civilizations, that the world's governments are working with aliens.
They know about the buried artifacts, they know about the ancient civilizations down there, and they know about the extraterrestrial civilizations that continue to operate in Antarctica at the very moment.
It's totally possible that Antarctica contains an extraterrestrial home base on Earth. It's a totally isolated part of the planet. It's completely uninhabited, or was until recently. It's ideal.
Atlantis is a lost island civilization that was originally discussed by Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias around 360 BC. Plato was writing about events that took place 9,000 years before his time. He tells us that Atlantis was governed by laws that were inscribed on a pillar that was housed in the Temple of Poseidon in the center of Atlantis. This pillar was made of a mysterious Atlantean substance called orichalcum, which means of unknown origin.
It was said that the Temple of Poseidon flashed with the red light of orichalcum. The copper tint of this metal caught the attention of the seekers that came to this sacred place. This has spiritual implications. There was something about this metal that was said to resonate with the divine.
2015, marine archaeologists off the coast of Sicily discovered a shipwreck. And preserved in the shipwreck were metal ingots, 39 of them, which the marine archaeologists told the world were orichalcum.
This raised the question of, is it possible that Plato's story is actual historical fact? And what was discovered here in this shipwreck is evidence of Plato's story.
Now, orichalcum is 80% copper and 20% zinc. What's interesting about this is that zinc doesn't naturally occur. Zinc only occurs in nature as sphalerite. It's a zinc-sulfur complex. In order to create zinc, you have to actually process the zinc out of this sulfide. They didn't have that technology back then.
Plato does not tell us anything about how orichalcum was mined or how it was manufactured. He only says that it was of unknown origin. However, given its connection with Poseidon and the gods, we can reasonably speculate that it was the gods themselves who taught the Atlanteans how to utilize this very powerful substance.
Those who could smelt metals, who could work with metals, this was considered to be a gift from the divine realm. This was considered to be something that humans didn't naturally do, and was something that had to be from the gods.
According to the ancient astronaut theory, our ancestors were taught in various scientific disciplines. They were taught the process of metallurgy by extraterrestrials. They taught them how to work metal with primitive means, just to get started with ultimately turning ourselves into the super civilization that we are today.
Athens, Greece, the 4th century BC. In his famous dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, the Greek philosopher Plato writes about a lost continent that existed 9,000 years before his time and was home to a highly advanced civilization. Called Atlantis, it was founded by the Greek god Poseidon, and the inhabitants possessed sophisticated technology. But Atlantis was ultimately destroyed by a terrible cataclysm. And according to some researchers, the story of its destruction is strikingly similar to Native American traditions detailing the end of the Third World.
The Hopi and other Pueblo Indians tell us that their devastating cataclysm was due to human greed and wandering away from the spiritual truths of our Creator. What's interesting about this is that this idea is echoed in Plato's story of the destruction of Atlantis. The Atlanteans were also created by gods. As soon as humanity wandered off into materialism, that's when Atlantis was destroyed by water. A perfect correspondence with what the Hopi said happened at the end of the Third World.
Could there be a connection between the ancient Greek tale of Atlantis and Native American origin stories? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest another story told by early Native Americans bears striking similarities to Atlantis, the legend of the lost city of Aztlan, which appears in the traditions of the Aztecs and numerous Native American groups throughout the Southwest.
It's considered the birthplace of civilization, based on the Mexica codices and the oral history of the Mojaves, of the Hopis. So we have all these oral history also that allude to the origin of Aztlan.
There's debate among scholars as to exactly what Aztlan looked like. And we know that the Aztecs say that their capital of Tenochtitlan was made in the image of Aztlan. And from that capital, we get a backwards projection that their origin place is an island surrounded by water. They actually built Tenochtitlan up into the lake and put causeways out so that it looks very much like Atlantis.
According to the Aztecs, the god Huitzilopochtli was the founder of Tenochtitlan, which, as far as ancient astronaut theorists are concerned, provides yet another intriguing connection to Plato's description of Atlantis.
Tenochtitlan was a place made artificially. Compare it to Atlantis. In both cases, a god was the ruler of it. In Atlantis, we have Poseidon. Now, Poseidon was an extraterrestrial. Not everyone should have access to Atlantis. The same thing in Aztlan or Tenochtitlan. They wanted to be separated. They had a certain technology there, which was a hidden technology, and it was not for the general public. Says the same thing.
The fact that we have stories that are not just similar but identical leads me to think that perhaps these ancient cultures were visited by the same extraterrestrials.
While mainstream academics consider the stories of these lost civilizations and their destruction to be mythological, the recent discovery of vast sunken landmasses such as Doggerland, located just east of the British Isles in 2012, and Zealandia, found near New Zealand in 2017, may offer proof that a catastrophic water event did, in fact, change the face of the Earth.
So here we have authentic legends of lost lands that were destroyed in cataclysms. Mainstream historians, still pretty much reject this, feel that it's all myths. But it would seem, really, that all kinds of civilizations could have come and gone on our planet. We know that there are over 200 known submerged cities in the Mediterranean. There's just so much on our planet that we have yet to find out.
In the Native American indigenous teaching, there are cycles of destruction and rebirth. The interesting part is that this is parallel to other great world teachings. In the story of Noah, the sons of God came down to earth and they were teaching the humans evil ways, and God decided to intervene and brought this great flood. In the story of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian legend, the Council of Gods brought the flood. The Inca god Viracocha created the Great Flood.
So all of these traditions correspond directly with the Hopi Four Worlds tradition about previous civilizations destroyed by the gods. The story is always the same. This speaks to the idea of extraterrestrial intervention in human affairs.
I believe there are ancient civilizations that some people refuse to write about. But ancient civilizations are coming to surface because the time has come to tell the truth about human origin.
Could it be that Native American stories of star people and of lost civilizations so closely resembles other ancient traditions from around the globe because they all encountered the same otherworldly visitors? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and suggest the Native Americans' knowledge of star people comes not only from the distant past, but from the extraterrestrial activity that occurs over native lands even today. Andros Island, the Bahamas, 2003. Members of the Association for Research and Enlightenment conduct aerial searches for underwater structures that might reveal evidence of a lost civilization.
Off of the coast of Andros, they discovered an incredible platform of rectangular and square stones that stretched for several hundred yards, and all the indications are that it goes back to the end of the last ice age and is probably around 11 to 12,000 years old.
The search is part of a long-term project working in conjunction with the Casey Foundation. Their quest is to locate remnants of the lost continent of Atlantis, which healer and psychic Edgar Casey said would be located in the area.
Edgar Casey is arguably America's greatest psychic. He was born in 1877, died in 1945, and he has documented over 14,000 psychic readings. What's interesting is that Casey also got into things like reincarnation. Some of Casey's clients were told that they had lifetimes in the so-called mythical civilization of Atlantis. In fact, Casey's readings said that the people of Atlantis as a whole had mass reincarnated as the people of America, and that America was, in a sense, a future life carryover of Atlantis.
Casey revealed in his psychic readings that the truth about the nature of this lost civilization exists in a hidden hall of records at 3 locations across the globe. In Egypt, near the Sphinx, underwater in the Bahamas, and in the Yucatan Peninsula.
Any 3 of these areas apparently would have all of the records that we would need to completely rebuild our history and understand how there may have been much more widespread extraterrestrial presence here on Earth.
Could recent archaeological finds in the Bahamas confirm that Edgar Cayce was right about the existence of a lost extraterrestrial civilization? And if so, should we be concerned about his predictions for the future of humanity?
Cayce was a cataclysmist, and in his readings, he was constantly talking about Earth changes and pole shifts that caused civilizations to be destroyed in ancient times. And Cayce said that we were going to have another pole shift around the time of the millennium.
Even a relatively small asteroid coming in at the right angle, not necessarily hitting Earth, but sort of grazing the Earth, could theoretically change the tilt axis of the Earth significantly. Now, if that occurred, land and ocean would redistribute on the Earth.
It seems as if history repeats itself. And it may be that at this moment, we are exactly in the same situation that the citizens of Atlantis were in.
Perhaps we will find out exactly what had happened to this lost civilization and learn from their mistakes and not sink into oblivion ourselves.
The more we uncover, it will all point in one direction. We are not the first, and we never have been. And extraterrestrials pre-civilization existed before our recorded history. And this truth will be revealed within our lifetime.
Could the stories of a time when gods and other worldly beings inhabited the Earth be more than just mythology? And might the discovery of unexplainable remnants from this lost civilization reveal the truth about our extraterrestrial origins, as ancient astronaut theorists suggest? Perhaps we are on the verge of uncovering the final piece of the puzzle that will change our understanding of Earth's history forever. But will we uncover it before it's too late? The Pacific Ocean. This body of water is the largest on Earth, covering more than 63 million square miles. Curiously, many ancient peoples living throughout this vast expanse share the same story of a long-lost sunken civilization, often referred to as Lemuria or Mu.
Mu was this huge continent that supposedly existed from Hawaii in the north down to Easter Island in the southeast, right the way across to Micronesia in the west. It thrived perhaps 50,000 years ago and was sunk beneath the waves, possibly at the end of the last ice age.
Among the many legends expressed by Polynesians and native Hawaiians, one is that the lost continent of Mu was home to visitors from the Pleiades.
We have all kind of connection with the Pleiades, but we call it Napoi Kalani, the people of the heaven. According to our traditions, there were some people got lost. And this is what we call the Mu or the Lemurian people you might refer to. They existed at one time and then we lost them, like Louisville City.
The Hawaiians believed that the Hawaiian Islands were originally part of Mu. And the belief was that the Pleiadians were the original settlers of Mu.
While most mainstream scholars dismiss the stories of Mu as being little more than a fanciful myth, ancient astronaut theorists claim that remnants of Mu can still be found today in the mysterious ruins of Nan Madol.
Nam Madol is a huge basalt city that sits on the edge of the island of Pompeii in Micronesia, in the Pacific Ocean. It's made up of hundreds of thousands, potentially millions, of these huge basalt columns
And much of the site is still submerged in the water, suggesting it must have been built many thousands of years ago.
Some people actually suggested that maybe Nan Madol was the last remnant of Mu that was still above water. And it was simply indicative of what had sunk beneath the waves from this advanced civilization.
Could it be that the structures on Nan Madol are ruins of an ancient extraterrestrial civilization known as Mu? According to Rufino Maurizio, the director of the Federal States of Micronesia Office of National Archives, it's a distinct possibility.
The existence of Nan Madol itself continues to puzzle people because it welcomes all kinds of possibilities, including possibilities of people from the outer space influencing what was built here.
Yonaguni Island, Japan, September 1997. Multiple teams of researchers, geologists, and professional divers launch an underwater expedition near the southernmost of the remote Ryukyu Islands. They are there to investigate a mysterious stone configuration known as the Yonaguni Pyramid. Less than 100 feet below the surface, the divers come across rock formations, including pillars, wedges, platforms, and giant steps that appear to be carved out of the bedrock.
The Yonaguni monument has been altered by carving, and it has been very carefully carved into megaliths, platforms, stairways. The only problem is that it's built for giants. The stairs are immense. So who built this monument? And what cataclysmic events sent it to the bottom of the sea?
There are all these different cuts that seem to be of artificial origin and not of a natural origin because it's too precise. Was the Yonaguni artificially altered at a time when the water levels of the oceans were lower? We know that this happened at some point during the last ice age, which was 14,000 years ago.
Now, we have to remember that at the end of the last ice age, sea levels were as much as 300 plus feet lower than they are today. So at that time, this structure would have been above sea level. It would have been, at that time, dry land.
Could the massive underwater structure known as Yonaguni really be the remnants of an advanced civilization that existed here on Earth more than 10,000 years ago? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and claim that further evidence can be found in Polynesian stories of a long-lost continent called Mu.
The Yonaguni monument may represent the remains of a trans-Pacific civilization that the Polynesians call Mu. There is evidence throughout Polynesia for an ancient megalithic civilization. There are similar ruins off the coast of Ponape. The ruins are partially submerged.
This lost continent of Mu was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it encompassed Hawaii and Tahiti, Tonga and Samoa, and even Easter Island were all part of this lost continent of Mu. And the central pyramid complex in Tonga is called Mu-A.
While most conventional scholars dismiss the story of Mu as being mythology, ancient astronaut theorists suggest an enormous new discovery in Southeast Asia could provide irrefutable evidence that this lost civilization did, in fact, exist. West Java, Indonesia. Located in Karyamukti village is a mysterious site called Gunung Padang, or Mountain of enlightenment. For thousands of years, the local population revered Gunung Padang as a sacred site, and many came here to meditate among the giant stone blocks. But in 1914, Dutch explorers discovered that the basalt columns scattered across the hilltop are not natural features at all. They are, in fact, fragments of an ancient megalithic site. A century later, in 2013, the Indonesian government sponsored an excavation to see if anything was hidden beneath the layers of dirt and rubble. What they found was evidence that suggests Gunung Padang is the world's oldest step pyramid.
Gunung Padang is probably the most remarkable megalithic structure in the whole of Southeast Asia. And what it consists of is a hillside on the top of which are a series of terraces on which are structures made from basaltic pillars and other types of structure.
But what is really important is the age of it. It has been analyzed by Indonesian geologists, and he seemed to have very good data from boreholes, from radiocarbon analysis, from seismic sections, as I've done around the Great Sphinx, that this site goes back an incredible 20,000 or so years, maybe slightly more than that.
According to geologists, 20,000 years ago, Java, where Gunung Padang is located, was not an isolated island, but the southernmost part of a subcontinent known as Sundaland. This has led some researchers to speculate that Gunung Padang, with its high elevation, could have been at the pinnacle of a civilization that disappeared sometime around 10,000 BC. When melting ice caps flooded the region and turned it into the series of islands it is today.
The compelling suggestion is that there was some sort of civilization here before this flood took place, that they built this with advanced technology, and therefore they were extraterrestrial visitors to the Earth. And that's why archaeologists are not finding the evidence that we would normally expect to see, showing a geometric progression of technology leading up to the ability to build a gigantic pyramid well over 12,000 years ago.
In November 2020, William Henry traveled to Weed, California to investigate firsthand if he could document any evidence to help explain the many UFO sightings, baffling disappearances, and encounters with strange beings that have been reported at Mount Shasta. And also to explore the incredible notion that the mountain might actually contain a portal through space and time.
Hi, Dustin. I'm William Henry.
Hi, William. Glad to meet you.
Local author Dustin Neff has spent years investigating the mysteries of Mount Shasta.
One story that I think I'm most excited and interested in is these light beings that are also described as living within Mount Shasta. Can we now tie that into Mu or Lemuria?
Yeah, there's a lot of, supporting evidence, and I think there's something to the stories. Lemuria is a civilization that was quite an advanced civilization for its time, and it existed somewhere off the Pacific coast of North America.
The existence of a lost continent named Lemuria was first proposed by zoologist Philip Sclater in 1864. Curiously, this theory is corroborated by the ancient oral traditions of the native Hawaiian people, which say that the Pacific islands of the region were once part of a giant continent, one that was home to a highly advanced, otherworldly civilization.
We do know that there were some people got lost, and this is what we call the Mu or the Lemuria people you might refer to. They existed at one time, and then we lost them under the ocean.
In the 19th century, there were various occult and esoteric writers, including Madame H.P. Blavatsky, who identified Lemuria as this primordial human civilization. And the idea was that some of humanity's hidden and occult roots could be traced back to this so-called continent of Lemuria.
Mount Shasta ties in to the idea of the lost continent of Lemuria. They were thought to be very technologically advanced ancestors, maybe gods, maybe extraterrestrials. But whoever these people were, some calamity befell them. And the legend is that the survivors of this cataclysm took refuge in Mount Shasta.
Could there really have been a highly advanced civilization that existed on Earth thousands of years ago? And if so, could there be any truth to the notion that they took refuge from a devastating cataclysm in the caves of Mount Shasta? One man who was convinced the story was true was prospector J.C. Brown, who in the early 20th century made it his mission to find the proof.
You know, J.C. Brown became really enamored with the theories of Lemuria and Mu. J.C. Brown claims to have been up here in 1906 prospecting for gold when he accidentally unearthed a tunnel, which he describes as a man-made tunnel. And about a couple miles in, he found what he describes as some kind of reliquary containing all kinds of records of a lost civilization. And he describes finding the bodies of mummified giants.
Wow.
And one of the things miners did was they would mark the environment with symbols. And there's a place not far from Mount Shasta where I found a whole collection of these glyphs that have been carved into rocks. We know they were made sometime between the early 1900s and the 1940s. And that would have been the period of time that J.C. Brown would have been up in this area, looking around for things.
This reminds me of in Rennes-le-Chateau in France, northwest Arkansas, Oak Island. We find similar kind of symbols appearing in these various places associated with treasuries, deposits. And then this looks like almost like two peaks or a peak within a peak, like he's trying to point you inward into the mountain almost.
There's an interesting twist to this story. About 30 years later, J.C. Brown returned to Stockton, and his intention was to raise an expedition to go back up to this site and catalog what he found. And he raised a party of about 80 different people. And on the day that they were supposed to depart to go up to this site, he just mysteriously vanished.
He just vanishes.
Yeah, no one ever heard from him again.